We think there's around 200,000 coins left on the federal balance sheet, but the truth is that nobody knows because we've never done a proper audit.
All right, everybody, we're suited up. We're suited up because the Czar, the wolf of the White House, is here. My brother, David Sachs. We were trying to get you on the program. You were going to make a drop-in to talk about all this great crypto news coming out of the White House. And let's face it, this was a, some people saying chaotic, some people say intense. This is a pretty amazing, intense week for the administration. So we'll get into a little bit of that. But you're here specifically to talk about the crypto reserve. So welcome back to your program, the All In Podcast, David Sachs.
Good to be back. I see that you've suited up here.
Yeah, I mean, I figured, for people who weren't here for the pre-show, I get on. Sachs is wearing a white shirt and a tie. I'm wearing a blazer and a white shirt. So I'm like, I got to go put a tie on. He's like, Jake, I'll wear a blazer. I got to go get a blazer. So then we came back and here we are. And
all right. Well, look, I just have to correct one thing. I think it's been a very smooth week at the White House. The president has lived up to one of his campaign promises. This is not something new. Remember, you go all the way back to his national speech during the campaign, and he reiterated this many times, that he wanted to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Sometimes he called it a digital asset stockpile. What we've ultimately done here is both. He also, in his week one EO on crypto, you guys remember I came on the show to talk about that. He asked our president's working group on digital assets to evaluate the idea of a reserve or stockpile. And we made a recommendation, and this administration is moving at tech speed. It's really great to work for an administration where you can actually get things done and things move quickly. We made our recommendation, and then we worked with the lawyers to implement it, and the president signed it last night. But this is fully consistent with everything he's always said.
Agree on that. I guess the one criticism that you're going to get when you go face the media, so I might as well put it here, is the order in which you're doing things. Sometimes Mr. Trump is very expressive on the social medias, which is better than, let's say, the previous administration, which just wasn't available and in cognitive decline. So I guess the question of he announces something and then you guys explain it deeper. Is that the optimal way to do this? Should we not worry about it? Should you come out with like more official stuff? I guess that's the move fast, break things that we are used to in Silicon Valley, but that people, whether it's in business, are maybe a little concerned about, that things are maybe different now in the White House and in how we're running our government. Maybe you could expand on that.
Have you ever considered that maybe you just had an overreaction to a tweet?
Well, okay. So if we're going to place the blame on me,
I'm just saying that
I wasn't the only one. The original crypto OGs were like, wait a second, why is he picking these three and not these three? So that made a lot of people, putting myself out of it, like, whoa, what's going on here? Is he picking favorites? And that's, I guess, everybody's big concern. So maybe you could assuage that.
We're not. Yeah, we're not picking favorites, obviously, except I will say this. We do think Bitcoin is special, and I can get into the reasons
explain why. That's a great thing, yeah.
Well, Bitcoin's the original cryptocurrency. It's the first one. It's the only one that doesn't have an issuer, right? It's very decentralized. It's, in crypto, they call this the Immaculate Conception. We don't really know how it got here. We don't know who Satoshi is. It's almost mystical, you would say.
Yes.
It's the most valuable one. It has a $2 trillion market cap, and it's the most secure. It's never been hacked, right? So we're now, over 15 years into this journey, and there's been a lot of people who've been skeptical along the way, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, but here it is. I mean, I remember back in 2011, I think it's the first time I bought a Bitcoin. I think it was at $120. Now it's at $90,000. Again, there have been all sorts of wild swings along the way, but this thing just keeps chugging along. And you can think of that $2 trillion market cap as like a $2 trillion bug bounty. If there was a way to hack this, there's every incentive in the world. And by hack, I mean like to double spend, create basically a counterfeit Bitcoin, I guess would be the way for people to think about it. And
it is a miracle it hasn't been compromised. I think we can all say that.
Well, I don't know if it's a miracle. I think it's exceptional design.
Sure.
And so I think what you could say is that it's been tested in a very robust way, and there's been every incentive to basically break the encryption, and it continues to chug along. And so I think the price has gone up as the protocol has gotten more acceptance. And this is another point, is that Bitcoin is the most widely accepted as a store of value throughout the world.
Yeah.
So we do believe it should be treated special. Now, that being said, we're also creating the digital asset stockpile. So all the other digital assets...
Explain the difference between these two. So there's a digital asset stockpile. That's the picker. And then on the other side, there's a strategic reserve for Bitcoin, because we do acquire Bitcoin, we, the United States of America, when we seize from terrorists, criminals, et cetera, we do seize these. And then we often make the mistake of liquidating them when maybe we should be holding them. Yeah. So explain that architecture.
So we have the reserve and we have the stockpile. So the reserve is just Bitcoin. The goal is long-term preservation. Think of it as like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. We want to put the digital gold in there. We want to keep it secure. We never want to sell it. That's the goal of the reserve. And you're right that we've made the mistake in the past of selling this stuff. At one point in time, we had about 400,000 Bitcoin on the federal balance sheet. We sold roughly half of that for something like $360 million total. If we had held all of that, it would be worth, just that the portion we sold would be worth over 17 billion. So we made this mistake of prematurely selling Bitcoin when we should have held it. We don't want to make that mistake with regard to the rest of it. We think there's around 200,000 coins left on the federal balance sheet, but the truth is that nobody knows because we've never done a proper audit. So part of what this executive order provides is that we're going to do for the first time a government-wide accounting of the digital assets that we actually have. So,
and if digital assets emerge in some department, I don't know, the FBI seizes some, the CIA seizes some, I don't know which organization winds up having them, they're going to be legally required to report that and then put them in the reserve.
Well, they'll be legally required to report it, and then they'll go in the reserve if there's a final adjudication. So, obviously, if those coins could go back as restitution to victims, or if the person who they were seized from wins their court case and gets them back, they're not going to go into the Federal Reserve. But if there's been a final adjudication and a final forfeiture, yes, those will go into the reserve. Anyway, that's Bitcoin. Okay, so then you got the stockpile. Let me just talk about that. So first of all, like I said, we don't know exactly what digital assets the federal government has. I've seen reports that it might have, for example, 50,000 ETH, which is Ethereum. But again, we need to get to the bottom of that. When we figure out exactly what the assets are, we're going to move them into the digital stockpile. The purpose of the stockpile is responsible stewardship. It's a place for safekeeping. It's a centralized, you could say, account under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary of the Treasury will figure out how to maximize the values of these holdings. Now, there's a couple of important differences between stockpile and reserve. So one is the reserve, the executive order actually provides that the Secretary of the Treasury will not sell the Bitcoin. Okay, we're prohibited from selling the Bitcoin. There's no such prohibition with respect to the stockpile. If the Secretary of the Treasury decides that's in the long-term interest of the U.S. to rebalance the portfolio or change the portfolio, the Secretary has the discretion to do that.
Okay, which makes sense because there's a long tail of crypto. We might see something that we don't have the ability to predict the future, and we don't have the staff to sit there and look at these assets every day like a fund manager would and say, what do we do with these? What percentage should it be of the overall stockpile, of the overall holdings? So maybe the decision with Ethereum is, hey, this thing's waning. We just put it into Bitcoin because we know that's the more solid one. Yeah, that's what I'm reading into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's largely fair. I mean, look, I think that the stockpile should be subject to good portfolio management, right?
Excellent.
And fortunately, we have a Secretary of the Treasury who is an extremely successful former hedge fund manager. So he's going to figure out the best way to manage these assets. And we give him the flexibility to do portfolio management. Whereas,
and
like
he has to live and die with what he does. He has to make those decisions, and that's going to be, part of how he's evaluated by the president. So hopefully he's going to be sharp about that.
Right, but the reserve is different, right? The reserve is just digital Fort Knox. Now, there's one other important difference between stockpile and reserve. So with respect to reserve, the EO provides that the secretaries, and I'm talking about Treasury and Commerce, they're allowed to figure out strategies to accumulate more Bitcoin for the reserve if those strategies are budget neutral and don't cost the taxpayer anything, okay? So it's possible that we could. I'm not saying that we will, but it authorizes them to acquire more Bitcoin if they can figure out a way to do it that doesn't impact the federal budget or the deficit or taxpayers, right?
Okay, well, I had a very simple suggestion for this, which I'll float up the flagpole here and see what you think. We've talked about it on previous all-ins before you on it. How about a simple crypto tax? Crypto wants to be legal. You're the crypto czar. Crypto wants to be regulated. They want the rules. They want the rails. Simple suggestion from your bestie. Why don't we charge every transaction in the United States 0.01%, just about 1 bit in that native currency? So you want to trade some Solana for Ethereum, for XRP, whatever, put in whatever names you want there. The government says, hey, you want to have a great, vibrant system here? We're going to need to take just the most modest of taxes, de minimis, in fact, in the native crypto and put it in the stockpile. This seems to me like a very
That's always
easy
how
win.
taxes start, is that they're described as being very modest. You know, when the income tax started, it only applied to like 1,000 Americans.
Yes.
And the legislators swore up and down that it would never be applied to middle-class people. So I don't particularly like the idea of new taxes, even if it's promised that they just won't affect people very much. That sounds burdensome to me. But look, we have very successful...
Well, this would, and just so you know, would be like more like a sales tax that would be handled by Coinbase, would be handled by Robinhood, would be handled by those platforms. They would administer it. It would be a transactional tax, not an income tax. So if you have a bunch, it's not a wealth tax, it's not a seasoned tax. But I'll let you percolate on it. Yeah.
If you can convince the Secretary of the Commerce or the Secretary of Treasury to run with your idea, then it could potentially happen. I mean, they have the flexibility to figure out budget neutral ways to accumulate Bitcoin. I don't know what those ways are going to be, but they're creative. They're very successful businessmen. And if they figure out a way to do this, then it can be considered. That's the point.
Okay, well, I'll be in the commissary later having lunch with you. You can introduce me. So let me just give you a fastball here. Well, we'll see if it gets in the strike zone. The appearance of impropriety is what people are concerned with. The picking of winners and losers. President Trump was the crypto president. He went and he gave that famous speech. I'm going to get rid of Gary Gensler. We're going to make it legal. And to his credit, he has fulfilled that promise. Which means, hey, the donor class on that side said, we're going to back the crypto president, not the anti-crypto team. Which means a lot of people who are on the Twitter and the socials have donated a lot. They have a lot of holdings. So this appearance, which you've now, I would give you credit, have cleaned up here. Hey, there's two different things going on here, and we're not using taxpayer money. We get all that. But the appearance here is, hey, maybe somebody's going to benefit. Of course, they came after you first for that without the facts. You were very clear. You cleared all your positions. You sold everything. You divested. So let's make that clear to the dum-dums who are just trying to say that you're personally benefiting from that.
Let me address that. Yeah,
I mean, please, because this is ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, people came out right away and were saying that somehow I was engaged in a scheme to pump my bags or to basically create exit liquidity for myself and billionaire stuff like that. You have to understand that those accusations, I mean, they're accusing me of a crime.
A serious crime.
A serious crime. And they're doing it with no evidence whatsoever. So these things are basically, it's borderline slander and defamation.
It's slanderous, yeah, I would say so.
In any event, what they didn't know, and what I then proceeded to put out there, is that I sold all my cryptocurrency prior to day one of the administration because I didn't want to even have the appearance of a conflict. And by the way, I could have waited. I didn't have to do it like that, but I decided to do it and take it upon myself to do that because you just know that when it comes to crypto, there's going to be a lot of fluctuations in the market. You never want someone to be able to point at one of those fluctuations and say somehow that the cryptos are benefited from that and create a conspiracy theory, which is exactly what basically happened. So first of all, I got rid of all my cryptocurrency prior to day one. Kraft also sold all this.
And Kraft is the venture firm that you funded that's done a lot of great work supporting founders here in Silicon Valley.
So we basically sold, I think it was around $200 million of crypto, of which around $85 million was personally attributable to myself. And we cleared that before day one, paid taxes on it, and basically so there wouldn't be a conflict. So then the smear shifted in another direction. It was, okay, well, maybe he doesn't own crypto.
Okay.
But he's in crypto funds. Okay. And so they pointed to, Bitwise and Multicoin Capital. And I was also in Blockchain Capital. And so then the fund managers came out and one by one all said, actually, David called us over 2 months ago and said he's going to need to divest from our funds. And so we also did that. So, I think basically they've kind of given up on this. But look, it's very easy for
why let the facts get in the way of a good slander?
Seriously.
And, full disclosure, you, when you saw me doing the Sequoia Scouts program, said, hey, why don't you do a fund? I'll be the anchor. I'll be your first LP. And I mean, one of the most generous things you've done in our relationship. And I had to have a call with you, weeks ago and say, hey, okay, you're going to divest. Okay, fine. No problem. No, it's not a problem for me. You sell the assets to somebody else. So the way people understand how this mechanically works, when you're in a fund, you have Sachs cannot tell me what to do in the fund. He just put money in it, like I put money in other people's funds. They go and invest, and 10 years later, you get a return. And hopefully that return in a venture firm or private equity firm beats the markets, the public markets, or whatever. But then you can also sell that interest to somebody else. So mechanically, and this
discount,
takes time.
At a discount.
And you have to sell it at 50%, 25% off. And it's painful. You will lose, I estimate, you're going to lose, I don't want to be gratuitous here, but 8, 9 figures by serving the country for a couple of years. And not only that, the great irony of this is the one thing holding back the industry is regulation, over-regulation of AI, and no clear regulation in crypto. You're going in to fix the two things that were number 1 and 2 on all of our agendas in Silicon Valley in terms of getting returns the next 4 years. So the sacrifice you're making is extraordinary, and you're making it a better environment, a regulated environment for the rest of us to do commerce. So I just want to point out that you're losing like double here.
Right. Well, let me just underscore something you said.
For your service. And I don't know how much they're paying. How much are they paying you for this job? What do you get paid? Like 50 grand, 100 grand?
I'm an unpaid consultant to the government.
Really? Is that actually accurate? You get no money?
No, I don't want anything.
Costing you money.
No, of course it is, but it's an honor to serve, and it's an honor to be asked to serve. And in particular, it's an honor to serve this president because he really wants to make the country great again. So that's why I'm doing it. But yeah, look, I think it's a lazy and stupid narrative to say that the reason why someone who's already successful in business goes into government is to somehow make more money. I was making money before. This involves a substantial disruption of my business interests, and I have to divest a lot of those business interests. And in divesting, I have to be either a taxpayer or I have to take a significant discount, and it costs you money. So, it's just a lazy narrative that people create, but there's no truth to it. And just to underscore a point that you made a second ago, you were one of the funds I divested from, not because you're a crypto fund, but because you might have a crypto position. We went through, I think, the launch fund's holdings, and I think there was something crypto related in there. And
we have 1 or 2 that pivoted into crypto, yes.
Right. So I just didn't want to have any problem there. So
listen, this is the nature of the politics we have. People are, it gets very personal. You know that better than anybody. And so, that's why you're here. And hopefully we can clean this all up and let people know that, hey, the intent here is good.
So just to go back to one other point you said about not picking winners and losers, I think that's a very important comment that you made that I see as fundamental to my job. I mean, look, I think we do think that Bitcoin is special for the reasons I said. Beyond that, we do not want to be in the business of picking and choosing winners in the space. And again, if some other digital asset could prove that it's as decentralized and as secure and as widely accepted as a store of value as Bitcoin, then maybe it could be elevated in the same way that Bitcoin has. I mean, I'm laying out the criteria for you. But look, beyond that, we don't want to be picking winners and losers in the space, and that's not my job. I mean, my job is not to be a regulator or to anoint which ones are good or bad. It's to basically be a policy advisor for innovation. And I'll just tell you the way that I see all the digital assets in the space is that what's fundamental is disclosure. If you're an issuer of a digital asset, you need to disclose, all the material facts about what you're doing, and those facts have to be accurate. You can't lie. My view is that if you, the issuer, lie about something, the government should come down on you like a ton of bricks because that's fraud. Okay, but as long as you do this in an honest way, people should be able to trade these things. I understand that you think a lot of them are garbage. You might be right. You could express that view in a trade. But as long as everyone has been above board in terms of disclosure, people should have the right to trade these things. And some are going to make money, some are going to lose money. It's about the freedom to basically to trade, to hold these assets. The government doesn't want to get in the way of that. It just wants to make sure that the information is out there, that it's honest. And if people lie in order to profit, I'm all in favor of going after them.
Well, and we already have a regulated market as an analogy. And when you tell a lie and you sell a share in a company, whether it's a private or a public company, the SEC has a term for that. It's called securities fraud. And we, have this new type of device. It's very innovative. It could be an NFT. It could be a trading card. It could be an actual utility token where you burn it in use of a service, or it could be anything. It could be whatever the person describes it as. But what's important is there's an entity with a group of people, I think you would agree, who have said, we have ownership of this. We're incorporated here in the United States, not in Panama, not in the BVI, not in some, other place where maybe they're a little faster or looser with regulations. You got to be here in the US. Maybe you have to be insured in some way. Maybe there has to be a board like there does in Delaware or in an LLC. There has to be some person where the buck stops. And if you lie while committing a transaction or taking money for an asset, it would be securities fraud. And yes, people will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And if you promote things and you don't disclose it, well, we have rules about that as well. We saw many celebrities get pinched last time for tweeting about cryptocurrencies. And this is the stuff that I think has to stop. I think it should feel more like what we do in angel investing in the private companies and in public companies. So that's your job. When are we going to see, that framework emerge? Because here, you're only like 40, 50 days into this, I think. When will we see the actual bones of a framework? So if I want to do Jcoin and I want to make an angel investing coin, or I want to do something fun, an NFT collection for all in or something, when will we have the actual rules of the road? And that's going to be multiple agencies, right?
Yeah. What you're describing is known in Washington, or the area of policy that you're describing is known as market structure. And market structure is about providing a clear framework for market participants. It would define what is a security, what's a commodity, what's simply a collectible. It's just property, but it's not a security. And then what are the rules for each category? That's known as market structure. There is a bill that passed the last Congress in the House, but Biden basically, he didn't veto it, but he basically, he and the Democrats stopped it. He stopped it in the Senate, the Democrats did. It was called FIT 21. And it was authored by French Hill, who's now the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. So we expect that he will be introducing a new version of his bill, probably in the next few weeks. I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying this. I think people expect it. And that's going to provide the framework for market structure. And it's going to provide a lot of the definitions that you're talking about. Now, I agree with your sentiment, okay, but I will say that I might have a different view than you of what is a security, what's not. I mean, to me, collectibles are not securities, but if it's a collectible, you got to disclaim that, look, this has no intrinsic value, right? That's a collectible. Think about a baseball card. A baseball card is a piece of cardboard. It has no intrinsic value, but the value comes from basically other collectors being willing to buy it from you. And you could just say that that's irrational or whatever. But so look, I think as long as people disclaim that this coin has no intrinsic value, they should be able to issue meme coins. It's a separate question why people would want to buy them. But look, in my view, that's very different than someone who goes out as an issuer and says, I'm issuing a token or a coin that has lots of functionality and has lots of value. And you'll hear some of these guys even say that, hey, our token is more valuable than Bitcoin. You should value it more highly. Well, if you're promising that and you're saying that it's going to have certain functionality, you better be telling the truth about it.
Yeah, then we start getting into the Howey test, and people can go look that up if they want it. What I will say is there's an educational process that has to come in here, which we've gone through as the United States. When people would buy interest in mines, people would buy interest in gold claims, oil fields, and that's when a lot of these regulations came out in the 20s around accreditation. We've spoken about this before. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I think there should be an educational framework here. And I think there should also be some nuance that you could work on specifically with this group of being clear that when you have a ticker symbol associated with something, or you do charts associated with something, it starts to smell like a duck. It looks like a duck. It's quacking like a duck. But then in the terms of service, it says, hey, this is a collectible. I think there needs to be some ground rules, which maybe it says, hey, these need to be presented in a certain way at the top level. So the nuance of disclosure is so important. When I tweet something, if it was an advertiser or a sponsor of All In or This Week in Startups or any influencer, or you would you do this, and you said, I love, this brand. You and I both you were an investor in 8 Sleep I Am. If we were to tweet about that, as investors, we don't have to disclose. But if we were paid for that, the FTC has rules. You have to put, this is a paid partnership. You cannot confuse consumers. And I think that's where you're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup work and structure as well, is the disclosure and how this appears. And then also maybe the educational system. So, if you want to own a firearm, if you want to drive a car, if you want to be, a beautician, and listen, we can talk about overregulation, you got to take tests. Man, it would just be so much better if consumers could take, like a 50-question test just to say, hey, they understand what we're talking about here in terms of diversification, so they don't YOLO their entire mortgage and house into one crypto. So what are your thoughts on those two issues? Disclosures, how it's presented, and then accreditation and maybe a path to accreditation, sophisticated investor test is how I refer to it, for all Americans, because 90% of people can't participate in private companies. Your thoughts?
Well, disclosure is the key. Like I said, I mean, these projects should have to disclose certain things. I think, for example, the token cap table should be disclosed. Who are the insiders? How much do they have? When are they selling? That's That's information the market should always know, in my opinion.
And easily done with the technology lauded by the crypto community, the blockchain. This could just be on the blockchain. This was always the problem we had as venture capitalists with, hey, this is a token project. Who owns the tokens? Where are they? When can I sell? When can you sell? The insiders, yes.
Yeah, I don't think you have to disclose everyone who owns a token. That could be hard to comply with, but I think you should have to disclose.
5%,
you should have to disclose
1%.
the insiders and their sales plans and their lockups and I would also say how new tokens get created. I mean, if this is a fully centralized token where they can just mint more, people need to know that because there's no scarcity, right? But if there's somehow an enforcement mechanism and there's enforced scarcity, then that's a different story. So yeah, these things have to be disclosed. And by the way, I think the market structure bills will do that. There's a version of this in FIT 21 last Congress. I think it'll be in the next one. And moreover, the SEC is looking right now at these rules and they're going to create their own frameworks. They're doing an excellent job.
Who's the new SEC chief? I was doing some research on him. He's a really pro, actually, more Americans being able to invest in privates, private equity, et cetera. And he's given speeches on it in the past.
So the person who's been nominated for the new chair of the SEC is named Paul Atkins, and he has not been confirmed yet. The confirmation hearings still need to happen. Separately, Hester Peirce, who's a commissioner at the SEC, is in charge of...
I know Hester. I've had her on This Week in Startups a couple of times. She's great.
She's excellent. She's very well informed. And she's very sharp, taking the lead on all the crypto-related stuff. So I trust her and I trust the SEC to produce those detailed frameworks that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that my role as, call it, innovation policy advisor is just to kind of make sure that we have the big picture right. And I'm very confident that the SEC, the CFTC, and the legislators are going to figure out the balance here.
Sachs, you got to go. Really proud of the work here. Congratulations on cleaning this all up and presenting a really thoughtful plan that we can all ask you hard questions on. Appreciate you taking the hard questions here on the All In podcast. And good luck when you do the rest of the media circus. I wonder if I'm going to be the hardest questioner of you.
I hope so.
And for people asking, yes, I'm wearing a suit because I am now joining the administration. Big announcement. I'm the official podcaster, the official moderator of the Trump White House. I'm just kidding.
People will actually believe you. All right, man. Listen, I got to hop.
Jokes.
But good to see you.
All right.
Okay.
Love you, brother. We'll see you soon. Cheers.